those ammunitions were actually designed for hunting large animals. Some were, for combat graded ammunitions, and they are all designed to kill.
The people in Iran are being occupied by a regime that is as thuggish and as despotic as it comes.
The United States needs to act now to prevent further atrocities.
A free Iran is beneficial to the world. Right now, if the world is intervening on behalf of the Iranian people, it is just making a down payment for a future investment. It is not trying to rescue something. It is trying to revive a relationship and bring freedom to an area of the world that could be so much beneficial to the rest of the world.
Hi there, this is episode 410 of Roqe. Western media atrocity denial is sentencing more Iranians to their death. Years from now, when think pieces are written asking where was the world during the massacre of 2026, when documentaries ask how was this allowed to happen in plain sight, remember this moment. Remember that information was there, the warning signs were there, the bodies were there, and remember who chose not to be. Atrocity denial is sentencing Iranians to their death. These are dark days, not because hope is gone, not because the brave Iranians inside Iran have broken, not because this murderous regime will survive, but because truth is being delayed. And delay right now is deadly. Denial does not always look like silence, of course. Sometimes it sounds responsible, measured, cautious, like framing a historic massacre as a numbers dispute, sucking oxygen, arguing about scale as if the moral question hinges on accounting errors. Oh, there are outlets, including Time magazine, reporting that credible sources say 30,000 people were killed on just January 8 and 9 alone. And yet some coverage still hedges on only 5,000 out of caution. Okay, then, let's take that figure. If the number is only 5,000 in 2 days, does the regime become benevolent? Does the mass killing become less historic? Does the story become less urgent? 30,000, 60,000, 5,000, the crime does not disappear. 2 people tragically die in Minneapolis, and that becomes wall-to-wall coverage on the BBC and CBC, as it should. Every innocent life matters, but where right now is the equivalent urgency for Iran? Where's that same editorial fire around a crisis of historic proportions? You see, there is another silence at work here, a hesitation that has nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with alignment, because when a people's uprising refuses to fit a familiar ideological script, when its enemies are the wrong enemies and its supporters complicate old binaries, some newsrooms don't quite know how to cover it. So they hesitate, they equivocate, they wait for permission that never comes. This is no longer about debate, this is about responsibility, because authoritarian regimes do not just kill quietly, they watch, they listen, they measure the world's outrage like a weather forecast. They count headlines, hesitations, and how much violence they can deploy before the world looks away. While coverage hesitates, bullets do not. While editors equivocate, people bleed. While newsrooms wait for carefully curated confirmation, the regime manufactures more graves. Western media atrocity denial is sentencing more Iranians to their death, and the sentence is being carried out in real time. Well, hi there. Welcome to episode 410 of Roqe, Iran Rises. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. Hello to you from snowy Toronto. Hello to you from Canada. Salam dostan aziz, durud bar shoma. Hope you're doing okay wherever you're tuning in from around the world. This is the 7th episode in our Iran Rises series, this one entitled The Case for Western Intervention. And once again, events inside Iran are moving at a very rapid speed. We should note that we are recording this episode at approximately 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in Toronto on this Monday, January 26th. That's past midnight in Iran. And as always, we're sharing perspectives and conversations as up to date as humanly possible. Over the last several days, one question has maybe started to eclipse all others, not whether Iran is in crisis, that much is now undeniable, but whether the world is willing to call this moment what it is, because what's unfolding inside Iran is no longer a matter of protest management or political unrest. It's about mass killing, information warfare, revolution, and the deliberate use of terror to break a population in motion. And so today's conversation, we hope, is not about hypotheticals. It's not about distant scenarios or abstract policy debates. It's about timing, consequence, and responsibility. What does meaningful Western intervention actually look like? What tools exist and which ones are already being wasted? And what happens if this window closes? Today I've got a strong panel with two folks who have been very active on the details, reasoning, and anatomy of possible U.S. or Western intervention in Iran right now. Farzin Nadimi is in Washington, D.C. Shayan Samii is in Virginia. Let's get to it. Today's episode of Roqe is brought to you in part by Stellar Law. Stellar Law is a boutique litigation firm based in Toronto, founded and led by Rana Nosrat Panah. The firm represents businesses and professionals in commercial and contractual disputes, particularly where relationships have broken down and the consequences are significant. Stellar Law's practice is grounded in careful analysis and strategic decision-making. Much of the work involves contract disputes, shareholder conflicts, and complex business disagreements that require both legal precision and practical judgment. Rana and her team are known for approaching these matters with clarity, focus, and a deep understanding of what is at stake for their clients. For those navigating serious disputes with real commercial impact, check out Stellar Law at stellarlaw.ca. Thanks again to Rana Nosrat and the team at Stellar Law. And if you are Iranian, do note that Stellar Law operates in both English and Persian if you prefer to deal in Persian. All right, let me get to our panel. Farzin Nadimi is a senior Iran and defense analyst with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where his work focuses on Iran's military doctrine, internal security forces, and the strategic behavior of authoritarian regimes under stress. He has written extensively on the Islamic Republic's use of force, escalation dynamics, and the point at which state violence stops deterring dissent and starts accelerating collapse. He joins us from Washington, D.C., and our friend Shayan Samii returns. He is a U.S. national security analyst and a Near East Africa and South Asia expert specializing in strategic communications. You may have seen him on Persian news outlets regularly, such as Iran International. He joins us from Vienna, Virginia. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hi.
Good to be with you.
Hi, Jian. Good to be with you. Thank you for having me on your program, and hello to Shayan, my dear friend.
Thank you.
Thank you both, and Farzin, thank you. This is your first time on our program. We appreciate it. Unfortunately, these are dark days. I usually like to start with some sort of upbeat or casual or shod type question. It's not really possible right now. One thing we're dealing with, as I began the show talking about in my opening essay, is some kind of atrocity denial that we're seeing in across the media and some pundits. Farzin, you've written recently about what you've noticed in terms of the death toll and the atrocities that have taken place, and new information you've garnered over the last week. Can you tell us about that?
Well, the death toll has been in thousands. There are various reports of that started at 12,000, but it's gradually growing to as many as 50,000. And these are some very credible reports coming out of Iran. Currently, the figures that we are hearing from Iran is between 30,000 and 50,000, and some even suspect that it could reach even higher. But 30,000 to 50,000 is the most talked about figures coming from Iran with regard to the civilians that have been killed in the mass atrocities. But but it shows what is more important is how this regime has been planning for and preparing and deciding to kill as so many of its citizens in so little time. And even though the killing started almost right after the start of the Iranian uprisings,
I want to, yeah, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. Just, and I don't want to get sidetracked because I actually want to ask you both about intervention. But Farzin, just out of curiosity, what do you make of the fact that there's been a minimization of these numbers? Some people say, well, numbers such as 30 or 40 or 50,000 that you're talking about have no substantiation. Others, like the BBC, are still stuck on, well, there's only 5,000. What are we supposed to make of that?
Well, some outlets, some people probably decide to stay on the more conservative side and try to be more cautious with figures. And one reason for this uncertainty is the massive blockage of internet access by the Iranians, and that is designed by the regime to block the emergence of information coming out of Iran, and they want to hide the dimension, the aspect, all everything about their atrocities that they have committed, and but even with the blockage of internet, we have been hearing reports, heartburning reports that show that how many people were killed, how and many people were wounded, and how does many of the wounded were not being were not able to go to
Yeah,
hospitals
yeah,
out of caution,
yeah.
because the regime has been looking for wounded, and how the medical teams have been having problems taking care of the wounded because of the methods that the regime used to to shoot and those protesters, and the ammunitions they use. Some of those ammunitions were actually designed for
Yeah.
hunting large animals. Some were for combat graded ammunitions, and they are all designed to kill. And they have no place in even in any riot control environments, and they have been using them very freely and in large numbers, and they shot at people's faces. But most of those protesters that were shot in the face, in the head, from the back of their
That's it.
heads by snipers on the rooftops. And this has been a very sophisticated, very systematic, and very much coordinated and planned operation
Okay.
by this
Okay.
by the regime and its security services.
Shayan, let me bring you in here. I mean, I should note that, as I did in the opening essay, that even if the numbers were 5,000, 6,000, the conservative 5,000, 6,000 people killed in 2 days, it makes this a virtually unprecedented tragedy, even of its atrocity, even of itself, let alone the numbers that we're more likely to believe. What do you make of this discrepancy right now, or what almost seems like an attempt to minimize what this regime has done in the last couple of weeks, Shayan?
I think it basically boils down to the fact that some outlets are trying to be politically correct. They're trying to keep all of their affiliation and some of the figures and individuals who appear on their programs to keep coming so they could have a diversity of viewpoints relegated. But the mere fact is, let's forget about everything else and just stick to mathematics. If we believe the regime itself, they're saying in Tehran only 3,117 people were killed. The regime is saying that because they have posted a poster by numbers 18 plus 19 in Farsi, representing the 18th day and the 19th day of month day in the Iranian calendar equals 3,117, which means that on those 2 days, some 3,100 people were killed, at least they're saying in the hands of, quote, terrorists. Now, nobody disputes that the terrorists are the regime officials themselves. But the mere fact is, if we accept that that 3,117 is just in Tehran, in all other parts of the country, we want to believe that there was only another 1,400 people killed? No, that's not the fact. The reality is body bags are saying a different things. The body bags that are piling up, the mere fact that they were so ready at Kahrizak to pile these bodies. And then one of the reasons they are asking for bullet money basically from families before they are releasing the bodies is that they don't want to have a head count. They want to create mass graves. People will not be able to pay for the body release. They will have mass graves, and it will just be mass graves. Nobody knows how many people are buried there. So the regime is trying to write its own narrative, and I don't think it would be beneficial for any one of us to fall into their trap and accept their facts and figures. So the number 5,000, 6,000 is just a joke because CBS News, that doesn't have any affiliation with anybody in America or in the Islamic Republic, they said at least 20,000 people have been killed. If CBS News is saying that, I tend to go more with that than an Islamic Republic's perspective.
Farzin, you said something interesting in your first response to my opening question. You said what this regime is doing in terms of the killing and the deaths is you talked about it being prefabricated, something that has been planned. That, of course, runs counter to a certain narrative out there that says, oh, a bunch of people went in the streets on January 8th and 9th and rioted, and the regime reflexively had to respond. You've now talked about evidence that shows, as you were beginning to say there, and I cut you off, that in fact the regime began killing protesters and people who were expressing dissent before January 8th and 9th, and in the days when this latest revolution that we've experienced over the last 3 or 4 weeks was beginning. Can you talk about that?
Yes, actually, the killings have started on the day 2 or 3 of the uprising, and they started in smaller towns, especially Ilan province. So a couple of towns in the Ilan province. If you go back and watch the videos, you can clearly hear the gunshots. And gunshots were not from shotgun pot shots; they were Kalashnikov 7.62 millimeter bullets, and they started to kill people. And you could clearly see civilians lying on the sidewalks and bleeding, and that was the result of gunshots, and that was day 2. So they started killing people on the very early during this revolution, and that gradually grew in numbers and in brutality. Obviously, the January 18th and 19th. They were January 9th and
8th and 9th.
Yeah. Sorry, I mixed up version.
Yes, 8 and 9. Yeah.
Yes, 8th and 9th. They were the turning points for the regime because, as I spoke with people who were on the streets before that particular date, the uprising was mainly consisted of bazaar merchants and the youth, and some other groups of the society. But at that very moment, at that very evening, many of the families, the fathers and mothers and the older siblings, started to feel that they could not just leave their young sons and daughters or brothers and sisters go alone into these dangerous, potentially very dangerous demonstrations, and they started to go with them, and they started to see mass crowds gathering up in cities like Mashhad, in Tehran, in Isfahan, Shiraz, you name it. Every big and small city started to see very mass numbers, and that was the moment that the regime probably started to feel very much vulnerable and they probably saw their days and hours even not numbered.
Okay.
And that was probably the moment that Sarallah headquarters in central in north of Tehran decided to go ahead and order mass shootings. It
Oh,
it 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 didn't mean that shooting of civilians was not committed before that particular evening, but but it shows that they made a decision to kill everybody
okay.
without any remorse at that moment because they felt that things were getting completely out of control.
Okay, let me get to the meat of our conversation for today, and the title of the show being the case for Western intervention. Farzin, you've been very clear that Western intervention in this case is no longer optional; it's imperative. Talk to us about what specifically makes this moment different from previous Iranian uprisings where intervention was debated or delayed or avoided. Tell us what makes this imperative now.
First of all, intervention now is necessary because passivity has growing costs. And we probably the West, the United States, just was introduced to a new level of the Islamic regime in Tehran that is very much ready and prepared to kill thousands of its own citizens in just a couple of days. That level of atrocity was unprecedented. That level of atrocity probably was not expected by anyone. However, we as researchers who had conducted research of Iran's security system, the mindset, we knew that at such cases they would see no bounds. And I had actually spoken about it and written about the scenarios where when if the regime loses towns and cities or even neighborhoods of in a town or city, they would resort to methods of mass killings or even weapons of mass killings, including ballistic missiles. At the time, I was mocked by some people who believed that these kinds of weapons at the hands of the regime are necessary to protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity and borders. I was on the belief that a regime so brutal, potentially and effectively brutal, is not should not have access to these kinds of weapons because they would not hesitate to use them against their own people if they start to see that their existence is in jeopardy. And in this case, we saw that well, they started to kill with guns and large caliber machine guns. They machine gunned the people, but I have no doubt that if they started to lose cities and towns, they would resort to ballistic missiles against those people, just as was the case in Syria. The Syria Bashar Assad during the 2010-11 uprising used ballistic missiles against its own people, and that would be the case. So this is a regime that has no bounds, and the West and the world is actually just realizing that these are they even if they survive, they won't have any remnants of legitimacy, and they will remain unstable. Their people will no longer see them as a legitimate or semi-legitimate even the government, and in the future they will even at a regional or internet or a scale they will not be a logical actor. They will be a vengeful actor, and probably they will commit more more acts of instability in
Okay.
the region.
Okay. Shayan, there are, as you know, major media figures. There are people all over social media who are not just incredulous that Iranians would be interested in Western intervention, but openly mock it. Oh, you really want the U.S. to come and bomb your own country? Ha ha ha. for all the evidence that I have in terms of the people I'm in touch with doing this program, working on it every day, going to rallies like I did with you in D.C., where there are people saying Trump act now or we want Western intervention, is that many Iranians want this kind of intervention. Talk to me about why you think this is imperative. The same question I just asked Farzin.
A simple answer. The people in Iran are being occupied by a regime that is as thuggish and as despotic as it comes. People in the West can't fathom the idea that, hey, you want a foreign force to come and bomb your own country? No. We want the Western world to come and rescue the people of Iran who are under the noose and under the occupation of an Islamic theocratic regime that only cares about its own survival. Let's not forget about the fact that in conjunction to what my dear friend Farzin just mentioned, the Islamic Republic is saying we are safeguarding the nation, and this amount of killing is because a lot of terrorists have seeped into the country. Shame on a government that cannot control its own borders, that so many so-called terrorists have come in to disrupt the country to the point that people are not only giving their lives, they are shouting the crown prince's name. They're asking for his return. They're asking for the death of Khamenei. They're asking an end to the Islamic regime. So the Western world needs to realize and recognize freedom has a cost. The people of Iran have given their blood for that cost. What we need to do is to hear them and adhere to their request. None of this slow foot dragging that, oh, you want your own people to be bombed? No, we want our own people to be freed. And freedom right now, it can only come through a foreign intervention, and that in the form that has been approved by the United Nations as the R2P calls for. So I'm not even going to consider the fact that some people are trying to assuage this as to, hey, it's just a mere coincidence that the Islamic regime is having so much trouble. No, the Islamic regime has come to its end. The people are asking for it to end, and the Western world needs to act to not only save the people of Iran, but save their own future.
And Shayan, very quickly, to somebody who says, when has U.S. military intervention worked out well for the country in question? You say what?
I say the U.S. intervention has worked well when the planning was correct and the methodology was correct. I wholeheartedly agree and accept the fact that some people want to bring up the cases of Iraq and Libya. But in those countries, the people were not so united in their request for freedom, rallying behind one person and asking for the world to come and rescue them from their despotic regime. And also, what creates a wedge is when people and different sects and different groups are not united. That is what we need right now. And the U.S. intervention has worked in the past. Let's not forget what has happened in Syria. In Syria, we may not want to follow that model, or the world may not follow that model, but at the same time, at least there is a remnants of peace and the people are trying to rebuild. In other areas of the world, if you don't intervene, like the Islamic Republic, mass killings will go from 50,000 to 100,000.
Farzin, there was this moment, or those epic days of January 8th and 9th with the millions in the streets across Iran, where there was a real appetite and aspiration for the U.S., for Western intervention to happen at that moment. You wrote something recently. You wrote, for the United States, the issue is no longer whether Iran is unstable. It is whether the Trump administration will set in time, to steer that instability away from mass killing and toward a peaceful political transition. Will act in time, align with the U.S. interests, regional security, and basic human dignity. Washington has both strategic interests and the operational tools to act now, particularly in the realms of military deterrence, compellence, information access, and conditional engagement. Whether the Trump administration will act in time to steer that instability away from mass killing. You wrote that almost 2 weeks ago now. Is it too late now?
Well, it is not too late yet, but the question is not that the West, the United States, should invade. The question is that the United States needs to take action now to stop the atrocities. The atrocities are still going on. It's not only killing people on the streets. They are a large number of prisoners, thousands of prisoners right now being tortured. Some of them even being killed in the hiding, in secrecy, in prisons. And there are also going after those revolutionaries that had taken part in the past weeks on the streets in uprising. So those people are still in very much under threat of the regime's actions, and those atrocities are still going on. Any action should be designed to stop the regime to continue to commit atrocities, and also to facilitate access to the hospitals and to medical facilities. So those wounded who do not have access to medical help, or even those wounded that are staying at home and cannot or do not dare to go to hospitals, can have medical access to medical help. And United States needs to act now to prevent further atrocities, because these people know that how devilish their system is, and they know it's just a matter of time before they go back to the streets again. And in those cases, the regime will go back to the same habit of killing them. And these vicious cycle needs to end, and it is on the shoulders of the United States and the West to stop these atrocities and stop the regime from committing additional ones. Well, there are negotiations. It can be conceived that there will be some negotiations in the future, but they should not be limited to nuclear subjects, even not to the missile projects. They have to also focus on the human rights, and they have to talk and even force terms of peaceful transition, hopefully peaceful transition to a democratic, secular political system in Iran, because the current regime showed how incapable they are of running this country. We know how miserable they have done economically, and we know how the society is under so much pressure. The more they continue to stay in power, the more risk of civil collapse and even probably civil wars, because people will gradually realize that this regime can only be fought with similar methods that they have.
On that note, Farzin, you've written about and talked about how when an authoritarian regime gets to this point of extreme violence in ostensibly demonstrating its strength, it's actually also a demonstration of its own decay. How much do you believe that the nature of the historic nature of the atrocities that are taking place at the hands of this regime right now is a demonstration of its own weakness?
They are actually a demonstration of their weakness. Otherwise, they wouldn't resort to those methods. They would allow to people to come out and demand the change that they want. If the regime would allow a referendum, if they are so sure of their popular base, they would allow a referendum. And I think one of the demands by the United States and the international community should be that this regime allows internationally supervised referendum so people can choose their own future. And if they are so confident of their popular support and popular base, so be it. So they should allow a referendum. So all the voices that they say are all those plotting against the regime would silence. But they very much know that the great majority of the Iranian people are against this regime and that they want them gone.
Shayan, when people object to the notion of Western intervention, when they've clapped back at me on social media, one of the things they say is, you want the U.S. to come and bomb Tehran. Intervention can take, as I understand it, all kinds of different forms. When we talk about Western intervention, what are some of the things we're talking about?
It could be three different categories. First could be the government apparatus, like the national security building, the Khamenei's residence, the headquarters of the Basij, of the IRGC, of various groups of IRGC responsible for the repression of the people, especially Sarallah Brigade in Tehran and in other parts of the country. And at the same time, it could involve cyber attacks and to dismantle and disrupt the means and modes of communication for the government officials. And the third one could be a psychological warfare. They basically to entangle them in a quagmire that they can't get out of. And because right now, today, there were reports that Khamenei has been created for him a tunnel underground that goes from his residence in Pasteur Avenue all the way to Tehran's Bazaar. So he could maneuver between these places underground. So the modes of attack could be at least to somehow get people to leave their residences, come into the streets, so that it will just be the government officials who will meet their maker through an attack. And I wholeheartedly believe that through the cyber attack and cyber warfare, they will get disrupted. They will not be able to communicate. And that would be their first line that the people could at least get back into the streets, occupy some of the major entities. And that's when people can show their
Okay.
unified front and their might.
Farzin, is there anything you would add to that in terms of the shape that intervention could take?
Well, I think United States administration did have time to intervene effectively during the uprising before it reached that culmination point by supporting their wards with action, by sending aircraft, declaring no-fly zones, even localized no-fly zones, and some no-drive zones. They could very easily with existing assets at the time do that, and by doing so they would support. They would show their support to and help them with their boost their morale and support them that if you go ahead and continue to occupy the streets and voice their demands, we will help you from above. Those actions, those no-fly zones, could be assigned to the regime that they would not be allowed to commit their atrocities, and they would be watching from above. And those increasing surveillance, low altitude surveillance assets could help with documenting the atrocities that the regime make, and they could resort to some action to prevent the regime atrocities, especially in small towns, and movement between the small towns. And we knew that IRGC used their Mahan Air and other military transport planes to transport Hashd al-Shaabi troops and their own troops between cities, and a no-fly zone could have prevent that. And the administration chose not to do so, and keep on the word side and the speaking side, and those promises were not helpful at the end. And then hopefully this time, with all those additional assets in place, the United States will keep all the options open, and the options, as Shayan said, there are the various options on the table, and they can start with limited action against command and control communications. If they deprive the Iranian people from communicating, from using internet, they should be deprived from communicating and using the internet as well. They should not be allowed to use mass media to further their narrative, and additionally, the headquarters, the security headquarters that have been so instrumental in committing those atrocities, can target, but that can escalate if gradually, if the regime continues to its hold on power, and probably start retaliating, and that. The United States should also show the Iranian regime that they will dominate the escalation ladder, and they can escalate as much as needed in order to prevent them from taking the region to further escalation.
I'm so grateful to both of you for taking the time to do this today. A final question to you both, and perhaps a non-traditional final question. Normally I might end with something like, what do you think is going to happen, or what hope do you have, etc. But just because we also have non-Iranians listening, and the case is often made by some folks in Western countries, usually at this point, non-Iranians saying, well, why should the U.S. get involved? This is not our battle. This is a foreign policy issue. It's not something that we don't need to police the world and get involved again. People in Canada say the same thing about the Canadian government, etc. Farzin, you've recently made the case that there are U.S. interests in doing this. We don't expect the U.S. administration to intervene because they're lovers of democracy and want to free the Iranian people. But in fact, it makes sense geopolitically, strategically, economically for the U.S. to intervene. Can you, before we go, talk about that?
Very simply, because the Iranian regime showed its true face. It showed its true colors, and they have no respect for human dignity, and they have no respect for truth, and they very easily lie, and they cannot be trusted in any form of negotiations, and they have to be stopped, and they have to be stopped permanently. Because this regime, if allowed to survive, it will act more vengeful, and it will push the region toward more instability.
Final word to you, Shayan.
At an event that Farzin moderated at Iran International with General Petraeus, I posed the same question to him, and I said, "What is the benefit of a free Iran for the national security of the United States and the world?" And his answer was, it is multiple folds. We cannot enumerate them because, number one, the energy that people in US and in North America are using, it would be a lot more accessible and a lot more reasonable in price. The stability of this Persian Gulf area would be enormous to US allies, and it would be much more beneficial for the United States to have economic expansion along with the rest of the Western world in an untapped market in Iran. Iran has multiple levels of resources, and if they were to establish and invest in Iran, they could at least hire 60% of Iranian workforce, bring the rest of the workforce from their countries, and see a multiple line of communication and line of trade. So a free Iran is beneficial to the world. Right now, if the world is intervening on behalf of the Iranian people, it is just making a down payment for a future investment. It is not trying to rescue something. It is trying to revive a relationship and bring freedom to an area of the world that could be so much beneficial to the rest of the world.
Eloquently said, as is your brand. Thank you, Shayan. Thank you so much, Farzin. It's been an education and a joy to have you both on today, even in these dark times. Thank you. Hope to see you both soon. Merci.
Thank you for having me.
Khodafis. Big thanks to Farzin and Shayan for their insights. We really appreciate having them on. And as ever, give us your feedback. You can write us at info@roqemedia.com, info@roqemedia.com, or be part of the conversation that's happening on all of our platforms right now in the comments sections on YouTube, on Instagram, on Telegram, on Apple and Spotify, etc. This is full time for Roqe for today. I want to thank this amazing core team who put this show together twice a week now. Sabi Roham Meher, who pulled the heroic duty of doing it all today. Super Parisa Sanjirani and the photo and video queen Tina Farahi. Special thanks to Smart Pega, Charming Kimia, Talented Anahita, Methodical Kaveh, and the Rising Keon for all of your help. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us, for sharing our content. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already on any or all of our platforms. It's free to subscribe. Do share our material. You can find moments from the show and a lot of information on our Instagram page at Roqe Media. You can find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. And as ever, in the immortal words of my late Uncle Behrang, Mizun Bashi.